This is an important question, especially given the time period and the complexities that it has produced in people's minds, societies, in their life, both for monastics, of course, but as well as with lay people, the community that supports the monks and nuns. It's in reference to the minor rules. How important are the minor rules? So that is essentially the question, and how they pertain to the practice. Some might think this does not relate to them, but as I said, it very much is important for both monks or monastics and laity, because after all, it's the laity that supports and takes care of the needs, the requisites of the monks, and the laity has to know how to identify, because they've heard one thing, they've read one thing in the suttas or texts, and then they see things sometimes that they will either justify, explain away, or hold a very firm stance upon. So it's good to know, it's good to have a reference, and I appreciate the question, in fact. It doesn't come up often, if at all, and when it does come out, it's usually within monastic settings, typically monasteries, and it's very ceremonialized or ritualized in a sense, and it has the impression upon people's minds that this is for the select people, select few within society, or a very small minority, and it doesn't apply to their daily lives, etc., etc. So it's very much, it's broad in its scope of importance, that is. So minor rules, just to familiarize individuals, people, as to what this is in reference for. For the monks and nuns, the Buddha had given what we have in Pali, it's called the Patimokkha. And Patimokkha is a section of the teaching we call the Vinaya, or the basket of disciplinary rules for monks and nuns. So the Buddha taught two things: the Dhamma, which we see in the form of the suttantas, or what we know as suttas now, what we use as suttas, discourses, the teachings that usually are found within that section of the teachings, or the basket, Sutta Pitaka is called sometimes, and the Vinaya, or code of discipline, or the disciplinary rules of monastics, as I mentioned, Vinaya Pitaka. Now, within the Vinaya Pitaka, or the basket of disciplinary rules, we have also many discourses, which often get to be ignored or thought of as, it's just for the code of discipline, it's just the Buddha listing the different rules and that's it. No, there's a lot of Dhamma within the Vinaya, and that's where the term sutta comes from, actually, to be distinguished. Now, within these suttas, they are definitely related with the disciplinary measures or codes. We call them codes, but basically they're the rules where we see an incident taking place while the Buddha is teaching, or during or after the incident has taken place, where the Buddha explains the Dhamma, explains different aspects of the Dhamma, which in many cases we find references of or similarities within the Sutta Pitaka, where we find the actual Dhamma, let's say, or suttas as we know it, in the, be it the Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, long discourses, middle discourses, middle-length discourses, the numerical discourses, etc. So I mentioned about incidents, events, where you have a person, a monk usually, or a nun, that is engaging in some type of an activity where someone sees something and they come and report it to the Buddha, or they themselves mention it. You have a few of those happening, in the Vinaya, where someone comes and says, "Bhante, this is what I did, what I said." And usually the Buddha will scold them because many people ignore the fact that these are based on, if you narrow it down, it's based on decency. In many cases, it's common sense. But people are people, whichever generation of people we're talking about, or time period, or cultural mores, or things, or traditions that we are making references to. Sometimes you'd be shocked to know, oh my, like, why would a person do that? So, which is, the shock factor is very real when a person picks up, let's say, to look at what are these things called Vinaya rules. A few times when I picked up as a layman, when I was first being introduced to the Vinaya, a few times I was forced to close the book and put it away, because I was like, you can't be serious. People actually did that? They needed a rule for that? Really? Yeah. So you can only imagine the Buddha's own position when he's looking at the Sangha, and someone among the Sangha, or a few people in the Sangha, had resorted to doing things or saying things, behaving basically in ways that were quite ludicrous or shocking. As I said, beyond the bounds of what is decent. So, but just to give I can't get into the whole, obviously, it will take more than, it won't be a brief Q&A for sure if I address all the aspects of it, which will take days. But the Vinaya rules as such, for a monk, a bhikkhu that is, we have 220, basically 220, 227, because there's also the execution of the various ways of delivering, such as a resolution is brought about, or how to resolve issues, or a matter, a legal matter, we call that, let's say in the Sangha. But we generally count them as 227. Okay, those are a lot, right? But they're broken into several sections of importance. The Buddha triaged them, in a sense, to several categories. The most severest, obviously, they're called the parajikas. They're called the defeats. They are indeed the major ones. And I have to also mention that within the earliest days of the Sasana, when the Buddha was developing his Sangha, the Sangha was growing. Eventually, after some time, the Buddha felt the need for more rules to be introduced, because prior to that, you don't see the mentioning of rules being instituted by the Buddha, because everybody who was joining the ranks of the Sangha, becoming ordained as a bhikkhu, they were doing it for the right reasons. They had reached a point of no return, and for them, they realized the Dhamma. So a person who comes to realize the Dhamma, for them already it's a natural outspring. It starts a new phase of their lives where they live the Dhamma and they live the Vinaya. It comes with the territory, as the saying goes. So these individuals, notably the Arahants, did not need extra rules per se. But because of the introduction, because of the influx of many newcomers who were ordaining, who were not of a level of Arahants or any of the noble disciples in their 8 categories, sooner or later they were making some mistakes. You know, you had different, obviously, the strata of the Indian society at the time. You had, obviously, royals, like Khattiyas, you had the Brahmins, of course, you had the mercantile class or the business people class, you had the artisanal workers, those who did a lot of handiwork, a lot of building, this, that, and then you had the untouchables, or those who did menial, really menial jobs and even dirty jobs, picking up trash, etc., etc. So you had monks coming in from all of these different rungs of society into the mix, into the Sangha. So many a time the people were running away from, especially from the lower classes of society, they were trying to run away from their hard lives, difficulties that they had to endure. Plus, becoming a monk in those days meant you will be at least provided food by at least, if you got invited to someone, a rich person's house, you were for the first time going to be respected by wealthy people, by people in the higher rungs of society, by royals. The king had to bow to you, you know. So that itself was quite intriguing, quite, hoped for, undreamed of, in fact, for many people. So it became very, very appealing, to say the least, for many, many people to become ordained. Which, by the way, to this day is the case in many, many parts of the world, and anywhere that there is the tradition of monasticism. You will have that. So having said that, oftentimes people forget to consider, as I said, the parajikas are let me just list them, they're 4. And these are, parajika means also a defeat, and they happen to be things that are practices or experiences, actions in a sense, that eliminate very quickly the reality that exists for the monk, meaning they no longer are monks. There no longer are bhikkhus. And again, this went also for the bhikkhunis or the nuns now. And one has to be aware that the parajikas are irreversible. They give the person who was ordained the status of them never being able to be reordained again within that lifetime. So it cancels out any possibility for that person to reordain, say, I'm sorry, this and that, or I didn't know what I was doing, all that kind of behavior later on. So it is you do it once, you're out. So it's and by the way, they are very automatic. It's automatic expulsion. That's what they mean. So the Sangha doesn't come together to decide, No, it's so blatant. It's so that's why it's called a defeat. It's immediate. And what are they? Well, there's the metuna. Metuna is the sexual intercourse, and it doesn't matter whether. And this was one of the reasons why, in my 20s, when I came across the Vinaya, Pitaka, and I was reading, and I was like, put the book away, because I was like, why would a person even think about doing that? Here, the reference is the sexual act, any kind of sexual act with a human, but also with an animal. Now, why would a human being do it with an animal? Engage in any kind of sexual activity with it? Well, people did. People did. And obviously, the Buddha had to make a rule, because the majority of the idiots who were interacting or engaging in such behavior needed a rule. That's why this was, the Vinaya came about, the rules came about, because you didn't have the caliber of practitioners in the majority of the Sangha. There was a bigger tendency for people to commit these things and say, well, it's not human. So there's that. So what is a sexual act? Where you voluntarily are engaging in some type of you're participating in a sexual act or intercourse. Any kind of behavior that has to do with sexual behavior, basically. And so with your body. And this is quite straightforward. The second one involves theft. Anything, whether you're taking it away from a person or a public space, it's stealing. You're stealing property. Whether it's something like money, a valuable object. Even if you think that, it's not a valuable object, it should be free anyhow, but it is valuable to someone else. And plus, it doesn't belong to you. It was not given to you. So, yeah, it's that's also very straightforward. The other one is depriving the life of a human being, basically killing them. And again, intentionality plays a role in here, in this. You're killing another. Specifically, we have to make sure that it's in regards to a human being here. And this covers any kind of manslaughter, any kind of murder, assisting someone to even commit suicide, or encouraging suicide to take place, or speaking highly of it. Okay, so these are because people were doing this, and even in contemporary Buddhism, there have been cases where some Westerners went to Asia, became ordained, and then they were advocating for suicide to simply reduce their pain and suffering that they were dealing with, whether it was psychological or physical or physiological. But again, that is a parajika. But people don't realize that. What's a fourth one? The fourth one is also at an equal footing with the rest of the parajikas, which oftentimes are not seen to be so, sadly. And this has to deal with, this deals with the claiming to have special abilities, special, supernormal powers, or in many cases, giving even the hint, dropping hints, or saying innuendos in a way where you're conveying the message that you are awakened, when you know you are not. That's key. So there is a deliberate effort being put to give the impression to others, or to flat out come and say, oh, I attained arahantship. There's also been cases, individuals who are seen as arahants by their followers in the thousands, if not millions, in some parts of Asia, for example, that claim that, and then when you look at their behavior, it doesn't match, or what they teach, and the controversial things that they've said, that didn't match their behavior, especially things that they've said or taught that did not match the Dhamma taught by the Buddha. So it's a very sad phenomenon where individuals do resort to such means by claiming to have certain powers, by claiming to teach individuals. I have come across certain individuals, teachers so-called, who to this day, even after these individuals as monks have died, but they had already stripped themselves of the ordination because they had committed parajikas while they were alive. However, their students still follow the memory of such monks, such individuals, without understanding the ramifications of the deceptive lives that they've led. And for that, the Buddha always encourages people to go and read his words, such as in the Vimansaka Sutta on investigating the teacher from the middle-length discourses. But people don't want to bother with that. They just go with their feelings towards what the teacher says or the crowd of people that were gathering around them. So it's a very, has nothing to do with the Dhamma. It's how one feels or gets so-called, quote-unquote, inspired by so-called a person who is claiming to be practicing Bhikkhu. Meanwhile, they are spreading the vibe, the false advertisement, in a sense, that they are somebody that they are not. The same goes with abilities to enter jhanas or have some psychic abilities when you don't, because that's always a real seller, People look for these things. People want to imagine. People want to imagine that their teacher must be. So they look for ways to convince themselves that their teacher is someone special. Again, this is a terrible parajika, but it's very seductive also. Power is very seductive, especially for a person who's had their own psychological, emotional issues to begin with. And all of a sudden they wear a different outfit, robes, they shave their heads, people bow down to them. That can do some things to the person. It gives them the impression that they are really somebody. They start, the self-deception takes over. And it reverberates with the deception that is continuously being manipulated, used to convince their own followers. So the students start seeing things, I used, air quotes, seeing things, when there's none. They start to look into the words, to make up some things despite the blatant irregularities within the behavior of the teacher, where the words don't match the behavior. That's already a red flag, but these students will not look at that, and the teacher will bask in that worshipfulness of students. Meanwhile, there is no bhikkhu there because they have already committed parajika several times over, and the students are hiding these defects in the behavior, in the character of the student, of their teacher. And plus, because there's also an image and embarrassment otherwise. If they announce that, oh yeah, my teacher was a fraud, what does that do to their position? Okay, there's hierarchy there. So newcomer students always will look upon the older students. So now, by extension, those so-called senior students of that so-called teacher will claim some important position. Be they lay people, which is majority of the time the case, especially in the West, as well as monastics in the setting such as a monastery. So you have this. The hierarchy is a very, very real thing, and it has been ruining the dispensation of the Buddha. So those are basically the four outlined just quickly, parajikas, defeats. Now what is left on the side are essentially anything that's left outside then can be considered, some might disagree, technicalities, but essentially we have around 75, and depending on whom you asked, 75 minor rules. But then that's in the strictest sense. So you also can expand that and turn it into 92. Remember, there's 227, right? So, but essentially what is usually agreed upon as minor rules comprise about 210, okay, roughly. So the majority of the rules are minor rules. So I know it might be somewhat tedious or too much for some people to listen to this, but it's important. And hang in there with me. What many people forget to consider is that on his deathbed, the Buddha in Kushinara, he turned to Ananda when Ananda reached over and he was asking the very last questions, which he thought very critical and truly so. One was, Bhante, what should we do about the rules? Any last thoughts, any last... And the Buddha said, if and when the Sangha decides, deems it plausible, necessary, then they can go ahead and, as the case may be, to go ahead and get rid of the minor rules. Now, given the context of where the Venerable Ananda was and what state the Buddha was in, this is happening the last moments of his life, the last few breaths. He did not ask further questions. Bhante, which rules specifically within the minor rules? He didn't say any of those, he didn't make an effort. Perhaps he wanted to, but he didn't. And then later on, in the first council, when he was being asked, Venerable Upali was the person who was reciting the whole entire Vinaya Pitaka, by the way. He was the monk who was the best. He was the grandmaster of all Vinaya rules. And he was acknowledged for that by the Buddha himself. So when he recounted all the rules and the incidents and all the amendments, which I'm going to get to, for these rules, Venerable Ananda was questioned as to what the Buddha say about the Vinaya, and he says, the Buddha said, if the Sangha finds it necessary, they can abolish. And that created some type of I wouldn't say agitation, but some unpleasant situation for Venerable Ananda, at least, because he was now being interrogated as to what did the Buddha mean by the minor rules. Completely abolish them? So finally, the consensus was, within those 500 arahants who were gathered in the cave, a big cave in India, to recite the whole entire Dhamma as well as the Vinaya, they decided that it's much better to keep the whole thing intact than, because they didn't know which specific rules and how. And the Buddha did not have, obviously, the energy or the time to put the caveats or give you footnotes in what situation, because he had already done that. So they said many people with the less integrity, on hearing this last decision by the Buddha pertaining to the Vinaya rules, they might very well go ahead and abuse it for their own nefarious purposes and lack in discipline and decency. So they said, to avoid such circumstances, let us all keep the Vinaya intact the way it is. And that's what they did. So that's how we ended up with 227. Still kept. Now, I mentioned some things about the Vinaya as far as this incidents that happened, this and that. So in many cases, because once the rules were set, especially the bhikkhus who were truly dedicated to the practice, they really took it to heart. Minor or major didn't make a difference for them. It's a rule and we apply it. And that's essentially the spirit with which we practice the Vinaya. However, ever so often, they would run into some human problems, such as, let's say, a bhikkhu who has to go and tend to their mother or father who's ailing, who's dying, especially during, let's say, the Vassa. Well, there were, you're not allowed to leave the monastery, monastic ground, while we are on Vassa. And that goes for the whole day, let's say. And it has to be a reason for you to leave. Again, we didn't even have these reins. It was something that was instigated by lay people coming to the Buddha and making complaints, in a sense. Oh, how come the other traditions, other sects, are practicing this? Because this was done during the monsoon season. Context, situational, relational, getting the whole picture involved, and then understanding what the rule was for. But because it was stated by the Buddha, no one can leave during the Vassa, many people didn't go. Or they would suffer because they, even with a good excuse, and they would tell the other bhikkhus about it. And so for some reason, they didn't have roads, this and that, or means to travel back. So now the person would be stuck, but they would now have remorse, because they feel they have contradicted the statements or disobeyed the Buddha. And then they would come to the Buddha later on and they would feel terrible. Bhante, I did this and that. To which the Buddha would institute an amendment. He would make an amendment to the rule, extending it to 3 days, to 7 days, and such as staying away from the monastery while you're tending to your parents, ailing parents, and taking care of, especially in the case where you're the only child, which was, the case with many monastics. So I'm just giving an example here. The amendments are extremely important, and you see it again and again and again, where the Buddha says, bhikkhus, use your common sense, in a sense. And it's like, but one group was doing it out of respect, genuine respect for the Buddha. And what that means is they were approaching the rules with which we live by as crucial to maintain health and well-being of the dispensation of the Buddha for many, many, many generations to come. And we are terribly thankful for them to have done so. So they are the role models. But people neglect to consider as I said, the human element, the contextual element, which is all that you see in the amendments being made after a rule is set. Again, the parajikas, or the defeats that I mentioned, they are untouchable. They have to be set aside. These are not minor rules. Minor rules could be basically about etiquette, about cultural mores and things. For example, spitting. You had people who would go and just, get a big hawk of, spit in their mouth, all that sounds, and then they would ignore where they were. And they were spitting left and right. I've seen this. I do see this in my travels. In the past, I've seen this. So the Buddha had to make a rule for people not to do that. Slurping your food or eating as if you are, you have not seen food forever. And now they've given you a bowl of food that's full of delicious, whatever you think is enjoyable. And now you're going head first. And you're eating in a manner that lacks respect. Not just the respect. Remember, the bottom line is to see whether the person is mindful and to maintain sampajanya, to maintain full awareness of their thinking, their speech, and their bodily behavior. And eating definitely is a bodily behavior, but it's not solely bodily behavior, because your body is reflecting what your mind is already doing and what your internal dialogue is doing. Oh, look at that, I want to get that. Oh, I want to finish this bowl and get another one. I'm going to get a second helping of this. Oh, they just brought the... You see this in real life. I have seen it. So to avoid that, people have come up with different tricks and means of subduing that, suppressing that. See, I'm not spitting over there, but I'm eating very much, with some decorum, this and that. I'm not slurping like that, or I'm not licking my fingers. We have rules for that. Or I'm not wearing my robes like this, like it says in the sutta, in the Vinaya. So I am a good monk, and people look at that and then evaluate you. Oh, look at that! Look at that! That is, oh. So now we come to the sneaky aspect of how a human being can function and usually functions, and the Vinaya cannot protect us against that. For that, you need the person to have adisila, which many people don't even pay attention to. The Buddha talks about adisila, just like he talks about adicitta and adipanya. Adi means like the higher virtue. Higher means you go beyond the visible, which unfortunately the majority of people look at. Oh, did you see that? Oh, he was not supposed to do that. Because, hey, monks are not supposed to be doing that. Now, again, you cannot know the internal mechanism of the person, nor the context of what has taken place for that to happen. Sometimes, even with getting some information about the situation, people are still very quick to judge. And people talk, people come together, and the majority of people are putujanas to begin with. Unlearned, uneducated, undeveloped, dense, thick to get something through their head type of people. And the Buddha says this, putujana, that's what it means. They don't really understand, they cannot know, they cannot see, they cannot recognize a noble one. A noble one doesn't just mean a Tathagata or a Buddha, by the way. A noble one means anyone who's living the nobility of the Dhamma, that is, any of the 8 categories of being. A Sotapanna, who's on the path of fruition, a full Sotapanna, a stream winner, Sakadagami, someone who's on the path or of gaining the fruition of one's returner, Anagami, one who's on the path of attaining fruition level of non-returner, and an Arahant, and someone who's working on the path to attain fruition of Arahantship, full awakened one. So you have 8. So majority of people will not recognize that. 99.99999% of human beings devout, practicing Buddhist, supportive Buddhist, they will not know that. They will see what's observable. And over centuries, people have come up with ways to hide, okay, as best as possible. And then given the hierarchical structures and all this, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, or you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Yeah, that's mechanism still is in force everywhere you go on the planet. It has nothing to do with cultures. I've seen this in Thailand, I've seen this in Sri Lanka, I've seen, everywhere. Okay. Here, to give, again, coming back to context, there is that lovely story of a bhikkhu, an older bhikkhu, and a young bhikkhu who are coming down the mountain to go somewhere. Maybe they're going to do their pindapada, on alms round. And they come down to an area where the river flowing. And there's a young woman who is stuck, who has to cross the river. But she's afraid, she's unable to. There isn't a ferry boat, there is no raft, no nothing. And so she's stuck, she's perplexed. And so the older monk is being attended to by a younger monk. Okay? And who's learning the Vinaya and the teachings from the older monk. The older monk sees the situation and offers to help somehow. And the girl says, she's very appreciative, but she's like, she doesn't know how that will take place. And he says, okay, jump on my back, the old monk. So she does. So he carries her over the river. The young monk is following him. So he crosses over, they both do, and with the young girl on the old monk's back. So they drop her off and they go on their way. She goes on hers. Now, the bhikkhus finish their work, they get their food, whatever, and then they come back, they cross the river, and they go up the hill and to their own kuti, to their own cell, because it's a teacher and student, so the student is living with the teacher. Now, at night, before they retire for the day, finally, the young monk who was fuming inside, perplexed, angry, agitated, feeling terrible, and angry perhaps. He spills the beans all of a sudden and he says, "How could you, teacher? How could you?" And the teacher goes, "Well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? In reference to what?" And he says, "How could you touch that young woman's legs? How could you touch her body? How could you?" He says, "Oh my. We crossed the river in the morning, and only once did we encounter that woman, and I offered to carry her over, and I did. I carried her weight for that, the width of the river. And I dropped her off on the other side, and she went her way, and we went ours. But oh my, you've been carrying her all day. Your shoulders must be killing you." "Yeah, but we're not supposed to touch women." I'm saying, again, there is truth in what the young monk is saying. However, he misses the whole entire point. Most people entirely miss this very important point. And hold on to this because we are, by nature, you can say, we are very much suckers for the observable, because we can point out things and say, see, that's why, without understanding what's happening around it, underneath it, what led up to it. We don't concern ourselves with that, and that is to our detriment and to the detriment of our understanding of the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha. We miss the boat entirely. I've seen this again and again. Without understanding, well, first of all, That is what I'm seeing, yes. He carried the young woman on his back. Yes, that is apparently undeniable. Okay. But did I see anything else? Did I hear from him anything about that? Oh, did you see? Did you see how young she was? Or did you, talking to the other bhikkhu? Oh, did you see what she was wearing? Or do you think she's married? Do you think, oh, you look for other pieces of evidence. That's what detectives do. Okay, if you're going to claim someone is breaking the rules of the Vinaya, fine. Based on one incident, okay, fine. But then you have to do the second stage of your inquiry, and that is to look at the person's behavior, which people don't do. That's why people are very quick to judge. And to this day, I've met people who would say, well, that was still not right of the old monk to have done so, touched a young woman. These people have missed the boat. These people have lost their path to the Dhamma. They don't know what they're talking about. For example, I've seen video footage of when Venerable Sumedho, who is one of the oldest Western bhikkhus from the Ajahn Chah tradition, Thai forest tradition, when after a long stay in Thailand, he wasn't feeling well, so they flew him out back to England, UK, where he went to the famous monastery of Ajahn Chah in London, in the UK. And he landed after a long flight. You can imagine how long that flight must have been. And he's already an old monk. He's a Mahatera. His body is failing. So he arrives to the temple monastery grounds at night. And I know this because it was on a YouTube video someone had sent. Okay. He gets there and it's getting cold, and it's cold already. And to give an opportunity for the younger monastics to do good and to show their respect, and because they really love to see him after such a long absence. You saw two people, one a nun, the other one a bhikkhu. I'm presuming a bhikkhu here. But the monk reached over to grab the door handle to open the door so that the Luangpo Sumedho could come out. At that moment, without thinking, because they're both, the nun and the monk, you can tell their eagerness to open the door and to get to see, Ajahn Sumedho come out. She reached out also. By accident, her hand touched his, and quickly she pulled her hand back, and the monk pulled his hand away from the door handle. This is happening very, that incident that just, they pulled very quickly, and they looked at each other, they're embarrassed, and then they waited for a few moments, and then either the nun reached again to try to open the door handle, or the monk tried again. The same thing happened, and she reached and touched. This is very, it's very impulsive, it's normal, it's a reflex. And again they pulled their hands away. Meanwhile, the old monk is sitting in the car, in the cold, having flown so many hours, trying to get to his kuti. Okay? After the ritualistic ceremonial ways of, allowing people to come and pay respect, all these things, and then go to bed, and then go to rest. So meanwhile, this monkeying around is taking place. I call it monkeying around because this goes beyond being berserk. This is stupid. This is silly. This is following minor rules, however. You're not allowed to obviously touch, let alone be in the vicinity and things like that. So anyhow, finally, I don't remember which one it was among them, somebody opened the door. And Ajahn Sumedho came out. Okay, that's another example of how ludicrous it becomes. When we allow these minor rules to dominate our behavior, and because the problem is, we have begun to equate these outside or observable forms of maintaining sila as the Dhamma, as the practice of the Dhamma, and that is wrong. And the main culprits of this are the teachers. That old monk who carried the lady across the river was teaching not the wrong sila. Yes, the student had to learn the Vinaya proper, but the teacher was living the Vinaya. There is the difference. But unfortunately, most people are not going to be noticing this. So people will not look at the contextual elements, the relational, the human aspect of things. So one of them had to have the guts to actually do it, even if the hand touched it. Because is the monk going to his room and thinking, oh, I wonder if I can recall how her hand touched or how she smelled, all these stupid things. Because people might be very much on the outside, be following the minor rules, being in the same room or saying hello to a woman, or by accident someone comes and touches you, your back or your robes, or comes and hugs you. What do you do? Oh, I have to go and confess and this and that, and then make a big deal about it. The intention is lost. The intention's significance, is not taken into consideration in many of these incidents. And that is where many people falter. That's where they miss out on the Dhamma. I have to remind many people of Ajahn Mun, Luang Por Mun, when he was asked while he was still alive in Bangkok, traveling to Bangkok, and a young man from the crowd got up and asked Ajahn Mun, Luang Por, we have heard that you do not keep the rules, or that you keep at least one rule. Is that true? And Ajahn, Luang Por Man says, yes, that is true. And the man is surprised. He says, how so? Because you monks have to have 227 rules. And that's another thing. Many laity have studied heard about these things, that they feel that they are experts at judging. Meanwhile, all these characters will soon enough end up with the wrong teacher, by the way, because they are so gullible. They look at this and this, whatever, the bells and whistles, they think, okay, this is the real deal, the genuine article type of a teacher, so I should be. And they completely ignore the behavior of the monk. So Luang Por Man says, yes, that is true. But he says, how is that possible, the young man? And he says, I practice the one rule that matters the most. I practice the rule of maintaining full control of the mind. Because everything is dependent on the mind. Now, people cannot see that. They don't know what state such a noble arahant is in mentally, which emotional state they're in. How are they behaving mentally, internally? What they're looking for is, I once was a layman in a coffee shop, and I saw a monk brought in by, I presume, the supporters, and he was also, he was a Thai monk, and he sat there at the table, and the supporters one of them went and got him, I think, something like, beverage, maybe it was a tea. And then they couldn't hand him the cup. They can't. There's rules for that. These are all minor rules, by the way, okay? So the monk pulled out what looks like a specific colored, handkerchief type of a thing, and he laid it on the table. So the lady came and placed the cup of tea on that piece of cloth, and the monk then pulled from the edges of that cloth the cup full of tea towards him. And then he was able to touch the cup. these are paralyzing, especially in this time period. Okay? People will take these outside expressions that came from a genuine place nevertheless. An arahant or a noble disciple's behavior is noble for a simple reason, because they are practicing adi sila. The laity have to understand the meaning of this. Venerable Ajahn Mun was talking about adi sila. It's the highest form of sila, because the person has become very much at one with the vinaya. The monk who carried the lady over his back across the river was the embodiment of sila. When we say that, it means they have gone beyond the rules and regulations. You cannot separate Ajahn Mun from the Vinaya. Because even though he says he only practices one rule, but the rest of it just follow as they matter, contextually. Okay? But you have monks today who write books on the Vinaya, explaining the Vinaya, writing synopses on the Vinaya. And then they come to places where very much, the strict followers of the observable sila and all that, they talk about it for pages, hundreds of pages. And then you get to another minor rule, such as accepting money, right? So we have rules for that. And they still hold to that rule that says, a monk cannot accept money. Now, take into consideration that, especially in the West, I've seen this in Asia, where monks in many places do not have the means to go walking from place to place to gain food, to gain their requisites. So laity come. And many of these laity, they don't have the means to cook something or bring something like food and other material articles. So what they do is they offer money, okay? And yes, they do it in a very ceremonious and very respectful way by putting it in red or white envelopes or whatever envelope they have. Or sometimes they don't even have that. They just hand the money. So you have monks today who are very much acknowledged by the masses as being living experts on the Vinaya, who go around writing, Buddhist Theravadan monks, Mahatheras even, who go on, let's say in reference to that particular rule, they say, well, accepting gold, money, currency, cash, for example, silver is not allowed. And so they say still, but they say to receive a check, especially if it's placed in an envelope or just a check that's written with your name on it and bank account, all that, that is acceptable. Now I had to scratch my head after there was a giggle. First I giggled, I was laughing, in fact, how stupid this is. This person has convinced himself that, in fact, the gold, the silver, actual cash money is different than getting a check. It's really ludicrous. But you have people who follow such individuals in their explanations of the Vinaya. Meanwhile, these are the same people who also go ahead and say, cigarette smoking is okay. And they always give you the example of, there's Ajahns, so-and-so Ajahn used to smoke, so-and-so. These people were spending most of their lives in the jungle. They didn't have much contact with, the ramifications, the effects of what cigarette smoking is, which came out over the last 30, 40 years as to what kind of drugs they put in, toxic materials. They go ahead and promote that. If you had told Ajahn Mun smoking was bad because of these things, he didn't even have to read the first page. He would just stop because he was beyond addictions. But he was taking it because the common people were smoking. And they were offering it because it was valuable. And they were offering it, what is this? Okay, so he would just do that. But now people use that as an example, as a precedent, as an okay. green light to go ahead and they do it themselves. Meanwhile, we have tons and tons of more information today that say, this is toxic, this is terrible. And plus, my health ultimately is the responsibility of the laity who's taking care of me. So if I'm deliberately, volitionally, intentionally harming my body by poisoning my lungs, guess what I'm doing? I'm actually getting very close to breaking those parajikas, engaging in them. Because I'm harming, I'm self-harming. I'm also stealing. Why? Because I'm stealing the money from the laity for my own addictions. Do you see how the minor rules? And the attitude is very important. Again, if I'm going ahead and defending my positions and completely covering up, camouflaging what in fact my intentions are really, I want to indulge in it. So this has nothing to do with context, in a sense. These have to do with how much I'm willing to get away with and lie about. There's that. So deception is being spread. So you see, it's how many nuanced it is, but people don't want to get this far. They just want, okay, what does the Buddha say about this? And done. So see, these are some of the things that have to be looked at carefully, because the same thing with betel nut. They go ahead and so many monks I've seen who had lost their teeth. Gums have turned into red, purple, some of them younger than others without any teeth. So how decent is that? How impressive is that? Because here's something that we need to look at as to why the Vinaya were set in motion in the first place. And that has to do with reducing suffering. We ignore the real purpose of the Vinaya. This is something that nobody talks about. Ultimately, you have to ask yourself, I am engaging in practicing Sila, even if you're just a layperson practicing the 5 precepts, which are wonderful to practice. But ultimately, you have to ask yourself, what's coming out of this for me? Am I constricting my life? Am I feeling I'm torturing myself? Am I basically adding more suffering to my life? And if that's the case, there's something wrong in your understanding of the Sila practice. You're not doing it right. You're not starting with the right intentions. Your premise is wrong. Just like that young monk, his premise of practicing Sila was wrong. Like this person who's saying it's okay for you to take money who are from people who are giving it to you, receive them, but make sure it's not gold or currency or nonsense. These people have credit cards. I've seen them. Okay, I met a Thai forest monk, Westerner, head of a monastery, an abbot, who was getting into the car of one of the lay supporters because they had to go and purchase something, and the supporter asked him, Ajahn, do you have your credit card with you? And he says, yes. Well, how does that work? Credit card is money. There's nothing wrong with owning a credit card if it's provided for you by the supporters, because they're not there with you all the time. And what if you need to, otherwise, even having a possession like a laptop. All these monks should give up their cell phones then. That's money, It's currency. So how far do you really want to look at this, and how honestly, these people are not looking at things honestly, but they're holding on to these fake admiration of the mere word, the ritualistic aspect of Sila, and they think that that is the path. That is not the path. That is not and has never been and will never be the path. Sila itself is only one part, one branch, one part of the training which cannot work on its own. Before the Buddha discovered the Dhamma, before he taught the Dhamma, people were practicing Sila. This is another thing that many of these people do not understand, and they teach wrong things to the laity. That's why Ajahn Mun said, no, I practice the most important rule, and that is the mind. Again, that means the person is living the Dhamma, because without the mind, you will always be breaking Sila, despite the fact that on the surface you're practicing 227. Because when that woman walks away, you're still thinking about her. That accidental hug, or that old lady who came in and she couldn't hold herself because she's so inspired by you when she touched your hands, you don't turn it into something else. You don't judge yourself. You don't judge her. You don't start creating remorse. And that is where we come. The Buddha taught Sila for individuals to not be exposing themselves to possibilities of experiencing remorse, which is agitation, which is pain, which is dukkha. That is why we do not break Sila. But these people are walking bags of dukkha, despite the fact that they are practicing 227 rules. Really? What if I have the ability to merge my mind with your mind and watch what's really going on inside? What will I see there? Chances are I will see you being vulgar, thinking things that are extremely inappropriate for a bhikkhu. And that shows, you don't have to know mind, with mind. You don't have to telepathically understand or communicate or see the inside intentions of a person. You can just look at their hearts through the behavior. The body will never lie. And contextually observe. That is extremely important to identify what or where the person is coming from. So Sila is there to reduce suffering of both monks and laity, and also to reduce miscomprehension, misinterpretation, miscommunication. And, for example, as bhikkhus, we do not leave the house at night, unless it's an emergency. And it's an inevitable emergency. For example, I had to sometimes fly to a destination, and the only time that was going to be was early morning flight, and you had to be at the airport, let's say 2-3 hours before. Well, that means that a taxi or somebody had to drive me to the airport when it's dark. Well, monks cannot go out at night. Again, there's rules for that, because in the ancient times, the city gates would close and bad people or crimes would take place. Or somebody might commit a crime, but they might see you walking down the street and the king's guards would come and collect you. They can arrest you. And that would create unpleasant situations for the bhikkhu. Now go ahead and try to explain to them why you went out, for example. And that's why the Buddha had to institute rules. So when we become so obsessive compulsive with these rules, okay, we miss the boat. We miss the whole purpose of the Vinaya. In this case, to come back to the main original question, how important are the minor rules? So look at them contextually, without ignoring your own contribution to the drive to break a rule, let's say. If you go ahead, and this has to do with the hug, I think that's what the question was coming from. What if somebody comes and hugs, for example, and I have no intentions of going out of my way to go and hug them? And I feel terrible. I feel terrible, Bhante, that what should I do? Should I not do this and that? I feel horrible, this and that. And what would the Buddha say? My question to you would be simple. Did you go out of your way asking the person to give you a hug? Did you imagine yourself giving a hug or getting a hug? Did you invite? Did you give any clues? Did you give any signals? Did you invite? Did you tell the person to come and give you a hug? If the answer is no to all of these, and especially while it's happening, while the hug is happening, let's say the old lady comes and hugs you, okay? Because you happen to live in a village where, let's say, the people are not, they're foreign to your custom, your thinking, your tradition. Not disrespectful, but it's just foreign to them. And in fact, they will look upon it as if it is something unnatural and even as threatening to be among them, but to cut them off like that. And it's an old traditional culture, which is totally foreign to the Dhamma. Again, context is crucial. And then you look at, this is very important. So we established the previous, right? Before the hug happens, okay? Or someone comes and shakes your hand. Touching, which is, you're not supposed to do that according to the, rules that we have. Again, minor rules, but did you invite any of those? No, that's key. Second would be about the current moment, let's say, during the hug or the handshake. What's going on inside of you? Are you saying, oh, how great that is, oh, I missed this, or this and that? If that's happening, that's a no-no. That's a no-no. The Buddha would be totally against that because the mind is lost. You are definitely breaking it. You are definitely doing it even for the wrong reasons. You are no longer a monk at that moment. You're acting like a layperson who's indulging in it. So if that is not happening, you're good. The third part is the stage where the old monk walks away, drops her off across the river and walks away, does his thing, and then comes back later in the day and goes to his kuti sleeping soundly. Are you fantasizing about, oh, that was a lovely hug, oh, I missed this, oh, I would like to have that again, oh, what can I do? Maybe I should go across the house of that old lady again so that I can get a hug. No. If none of these things are happening in you, and you're simply maybe thinking and reminiscing about how great that lady felt, that that encounter happened, but you're not fantasizing about it, you're not even thinking about repeating it, already all these things indicate that you are not attached to it. You are practicing adhisila whether you know it or not, because you're practicing the mind vinaya. Mentally you're practicing and becoming one with the vinaya for the right purposes. Right purposes here, in a nutshell, means the bhikkhu or the monk does not experience remorse after the fact, after the incident, after the whatever encounter. Why? Because remorse is the poison of calmness and tranquility of the mind. And that creates agitation, that creates dukkha, that creates suffering. Sila was put into practice as part of the training. Key. Sila will never deliver you to cessation of ignorance. It will never deliver you to nibbana. Sila on its own will never give you nibbana. Get it? Understand this point. Sila in conjunction with mental practice, purification of mind, which has everything to do with what I'm saying, checking the mind, that's where Sila really takes place. And purifying the mind and applying the Dhamma to be the real measure, the real yardstick, the real rubric of Sila and your Samadhi. The two trainings that I mentioned, Sila and Samadhi. And then those three coming together, the third being wisdom and discernment, really makes it Dhamma. then Nibbana's gates are waiting for you to cross through, to open the door handle and walk through, because you're there. You're on the right path. So, remorse, in this case, the Buddha says this several times. You see it again and again in the Anguttara Nikaya, numerical discourse, and in other suttas, where he says, the bhikkhu who has not committed a wrongdoing, to go ahead and feel remorse over a wrongdoing that didn't happen, is foolishness, he says. But then there's the other bhikkhu, I think it's from the Book of the Force, he says, the bhikkhu who does commit the wrongdoing and goes ahead and explain it as a non-wrongdoing, so doesn't have a remorse. He says that's far worse foolishness, because that person is on the way to hell. But the other bhikkhu who did not commit a wrongdoing, who is experiencing remorse, is bringing hell to him while alive. Because he's creating agitation, he's creating dukkha. And that is not this path. That is not the Dhamma. So, know these differences. They're very good. These are good questions. And please listen to this as much as possible to clarify any doubts you might have. Of course, this is in no way an extensive explanation of Vinaya and how to distinguish which rules to follow and not, and how to keep a steady mind. Context. Look at the context. You look at your behavior. And by extension, you can look at those people in their behavior before you go ahead and judge them, whether they are breaking or not breaking sila. Sukhi hotu.